If you've been struggling with producing drums, this will seem so obvious that you'll be embarrassed that you didn't think of it yourself. But don't beat yourself up, because it's not your fault that no one ever made this into an easy process for you to learn. But better late than never, because your production chops are about to level up. How do I get better at producing drums? The most common answer is noob, but the most common helpful-ish answer is reference a hit song and copy those drums. This answer is so broad and not really that helpful because it often leads to more questions. How do I find samples that go together? How do I make the rhythm groove? Should I make MIDI instruments or should I just use audio samples? Okay, I copied the song, but my drums still suck. So what I'm about to show you will answer all of those questions, and it starts with a drum loop. Someone's cheating! Before you click off or write a nasty comment, let me explain. First of all, some of the biggest songs of all time use drum loops. Second of all, the loop is going to become our reference, which we will then use one-shots to recreate. So this will be way easier than using an actual reference song because, one, we can find samples that actually work together with very little effort by taking them from the same sample pack as the loop. Two, we can use the loop as a rhythmic reference, both in terms of what to play when, but also the specific rhythmic nuances that make things groove. Three, you can use the height of the waveforms to match volume, aka velocity. Four, you can change the pattern as much as you want without any unwanted artifacts. Disclaimer. I'm going to talk about Splice. I'm not sponsored by Splice. I use them, and I know that a lot of you use them too. And it just so happens that the way that Splice works is perfect for the kind of process that I'm about to show you. So now let's go through the process. So first, you're going to go to Splice and you're going to find a drum loop that you like. Whether you have a song or a beat in mind already, it doesn't matter. Just find one that has sounds that you like and that has a feel that you like. Next, we're going to bring it into the DAW and line it up to the grid. So you don't have to adjust every hit, just make sure the basic beats more or less line up. Now we're gonna go back to Splice to the same sample pack and try to find the samples that are used in that loop. Now you won't be able to find all of them because some of them just won't be available, but get as close as you can. So you're gonna look for a couple kicks, a couple snares, a couple of hi-hats, and you don't need more than that for now. Now we're going to take those samples and load them into our DAW. Now a lot of people like to create drum racks or MIDI instruments out of samples, but for this process I would recommend just placing the audio samples on the timeline. You'll see why in a second. Now we're going to recreate the loop with our one-shots. Take one of your kick samples and line it up with where the kick lands in the loop. Then you're going to do this with the snare and also with the hi-hat. Then you can try different combinations of those kick and snare samples that you just downloaded because some of them will work better together than others. Surprise! We didn't adjust the loop to be 100% on the grid, and we're not going to make our samples 100% on the grid. Part of the process is actually copying the rhythmic placement of the group specifically so that we can learn what good off-the-grid drums sound like so that later we'll be able to do that on our own from scratch. So you see how easy this process is? Producing drums doesn't have to be hard. At this point, our drums are probably sounding pretty good. And if you're happy, you can just leave them like that. Or you can start to customize them and make them your own. Especially if you already have a song in mind, the loop that you picked and your song might have rhythms that conflict a little bit, so you can change one or the other so that they both work together. Try to keep the relative placement the same when you copy something to somewhere else. So if a kick is a little bit early on the grid, when you move it to a different beat, make it early by the same amount. If you have snap to grid enabled, you can just copy from the subdivision right before that kick hits so that when you copy it somewhere else, you can preserve the earliness of that kick. So next you can create some variations from the samples that you've downloaded. You can create staccato ones, reverse ones, different pitches, just mess around if you want to. At this point, the actual drum groove itself is probably pretty good. But since we're using one shots, it might be a little bit disconnected, which is totally normal. You can address this. And the main way that you're going to do that is with adding some effects to many or all of the drum layers. So what you choose to do will vary from track to track, but usually as far as basic setup goes for me, I always try out some EQ, some compression, and maybe a little bit of reverb. But you can always experiment and have fun with other effects too, like distortions, delays, phasers, whatever. But most of these weirder effects will probably sound better in parallel, which means that you have to either reduce the dry wet knob if it has one, or use these effects as send effects and not put them directly on the drum bus. Notice that today we did this completely out of context, meaning that there was no other instruments playing or voices. So when you do this process while adding other elements, you will run into some problems, but these problems will be addressed in part 2. Speaking of adding other elements, in the meantime, you can watch this video to help you get way more emotional chord progressions.